The surgeon didn't flinch when he said it. We need a $25,000 deposit by Friday to save your leg. My ears rang like someone had slammed a door on my future. Have you ever had a number held up to your body like a ransom note? Have you ever counted your savings with one hand and your breaths with another, wondering which would run out first? What would you do if the clock on your health started shouting louder than your pride? I told myself I could figure it out, that I was built for hard things. But when you're a Black woman who's been praised for being strong your whole life, asking for help feels like standing in a spotlight you didn't choose. One wrong move and they call you irresponsible, dramatic, a problem you made for yourself. Still, I called my parents. I told them the truth. Limb salvage surgery, short window, deposit due by Friday. My father didn't even put the phone on speaker. "We just bought a boat," he said, like it was the end of the conversation. My mother sighed in that holy tone she uses when she's about to teach me a lesson I never asked for. "A limp will teach you responsibility." My sister chimed in from somewhere glossy. "You'll manage." Have you ever heard your family turn your emergency into a character flaw? Have you ever felt the burn of humiliation under the skin where the surgeon plans to cut? I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark phone screen. Jaw set, eyes tired, leg throbbing like a countdown. And I thought, how do you beg for your future without losing your dignity? I considered crowdfunding, but time moves differently when a scalpel is waiting. Days become minutes, minutes become mistakes. The fear wasn't just losing my leg, it was losing my work, my independence, the version of myself I had fought to build without owing anyone an apology. I dialed my brother last, not because I love him least, but because he had the least to give. Cash poor, tool rich. The kind of man who shows up with a grease-stained hoodie, eyes red, jaw set, carrying a duffel and something heavier I couldn't see. He put an envelope in my hand. "I sold all my tools," he said, voice steady in the way that makes you shake harder. "Here's $85,000. The room tilted. I told him no, those tools were his future. He shook his head like the decision had been made hours ago. "Money is for fixing things," he said softly. "You're my thing to fix." And as the clock on my surgery stopped screaming for the first time all week, I didn't know whether to cry or pray. I didn't know how to carry that kind of love. And he, my broke brother, with empty hands and a full heart, he didn't know what was coming. People always ask why I didn't have $25,000 sitting in a savings account if I'm so responsible. As if responsibility is a magic spell that turns rent and groceries into compound interest overnight. I grew up in a house where money was a mirror, not a tool. Whatever you had was proof of your character, and whatever you didn't have was a flaw you were expected to fix quietly. Have you ever been praised for being strong because it excuses everyone else from being kind? Have you ever had your needs held up as evidence that you failed a test nobody told you about? That was the air I learned to breathe. Dad believed in appearances like they were scripture, shiny cars, new gadgets, the kind of backyard that looks like a catalog in June. Mom believed in hardship as a moral gym. If you weren't struggling, you weren't learning. My sister learned to speak both languages fluently. She smiled and was rewarded for it. I learned to do without and was applauded for being low maintenance. And Eli, my brother, learned to show up with his hands because he knew his wallet wouldn't be enough in that house. He fixed the leaky sink. He rebuilt the back steps. He tuned Mom's car in the driveway on Saturdays while Dad polished the hood of whatever he'd financed that year. He was always broke in conversation, said with a sigh like a diagnosis, but I watched him build a life in pieces, one socket wrench at a time, one used lift he'd saved for all year, a classic truck he swore he'd flip to fund a real shop someday. That dream lived under a tarp in his rented bay, a promise painted in primer and stubborn hope. My leg wasn't a surprise out of the clear blue. Anyone who's lived in a body knows there are long stories that look like sudden news to everyone else. Mine started with pain that pretended to be minor, an accident, swelling that never quite receded, nerves that misfired like bad wiring. I iced, I elevated, I worked through it, because that's what I had been taught to do. Endure now, heal later. Don't ask for a hand unless you're bleeding in public. By the time the MRI told a different story, microvascular issues, a structural mess too complex to patch without a team, the surgeon's voice had that urgent softness they use when the window isn't wide. Insurance would reimburse after, he said, but the hospital needed a deposit to lock the OR, the team, the timing. Money before medicine, policy before pain. Have you ever realized help is technically available, but practically unreachable because someone set the door just out of your arm's length? I tried to prepare the way I always do. Spreadsheets, calls to billing, a polite war with hold music. We can't waive the deposit. Yes, you can apply for assistance, but approval takes weeks. No, we can't schedule pending approval. Time bled from days into hours, and the throb in my calf ticked like a metronome I couldn't turn off. I told myself I could handle it, that I had handled bigger storms. But there is a special kind of shame in needing money for your body, like your flesh has become a financial instrument you're failing to manage. And layered on top of that is the script you learn when you are a Black woman who has outlasted other people's expectations. Be resilient, be grateful, be quiet. Don't be messy, don't be needy, don't be the story. As kids, the lines were invisible but sharp. When my sister needed braces, Dad called it an investment. When I asked to try out for a travel team with a fee attached, he called it unnecessary. Mom said no even softer, like kindness could disguise the sting. You'll learn more discipline if you figure it out yourself. It wasn't cruelty, it was conviction, and conviction repeated enough times turns into a wall you stop trying to climb. I took the bus. I practiced on cracked asphalt. I got good at making a dollar do acrobatics. When I went to college, I chose the commute and the job and the schedule that wouldn't offend anyone's idea of humility. I forced pride to sit quietly in the back seat while I steered with both hands and told myself it was better this way, because at least no one could say I owed anyone. Eli and we were the quiet alliance. He'd text me from under a hood, knuckles scraped, and ask if I'd eaten. I'd bring him leftover stew, and we'd sit on an upside-down milk crate, and he'd talk about torque specs like love letters. He'd show me the Snap-on catalog like it was a photo album of a family he was trying to adopt. One day, he'd grin, tapping a boxed set that costs more than your rent. One day, I'm going to hang my own sign. I believed him because nobody works like that for a hobby. He didn't have savings, he had value stacked in the corner, tools that held their worth like gold, a lift with just enough grease stains to look right, a classic truck he swore he'd flip to fund a real shop someday. That dream lived under a tarp in his rented bay, a promise painted in primer and stubborn hope. So when the surgeon said Friday, and my calendar said Tuesday, and my account said not even close, I measured what I had against what I needed and felt the floor tilt. Have you ever dialed a number knowing the answer before the ring stops, but you call anyway because hope is rude like that? I told myself maybe this time would be different. Maybe the word surgery would move a needle that tuition never did. Maybe the sight of me limping would catch in Mom's throat and loosen something like mercy. I texted our family chat. Can we talk? It's urgent. Dad suggested Sunday dinner. I said Friday is the deadline. He sent a thumbs up, like urgency is something you acknowledge, not something you act on. I went anyway. Their driveway was a brochure, fresh mulch, lawn edged sharp, and there it was, the boat, white and smug on a trailer like a punctuation mark. My chest went hot. A boat is not a sin, but it is a sentence when your leg is on a timer and your father's voice is still in your head saying, "We can't afford extracurriculars." Mom opened the door with a hug that smelled like lemon cleaner and control. "What's wrong?" she asked, already bracing to be the strong one. I told her. I told her everything. The medical words that make strangers go still, the number, the date, the way the nurse's eyes softened when I asked if there were options, and she said, "Not fast ones." Dad glanced out the window at the driveway, like the boat was going to sail away without him. "We just bought a boat," he said, and I watched a lifetime of those 4 words line up behind him. Mom's mouth did that pity smile I hate. "A limp will teach you responsibility," she said. "Like pain is a curriculum and my body is a student who needs discipline." My sister, FaceTimed in from a kitchen that gleamed, rolled her eyes in that careful way that doesn't mess up mascara. "You'll manage," she chirped, like grit could write checks. I didn't argue. You can't debate theology with believers. I stood up, the room swaying a fraction, and thanked them for listening like I hadn't just begged for my future and been handed a lesson instead of a lifeline. In the car, I stared at my leg and tried to do the math again, as if the numbers might have changed while I was being taught about character. Have you ever felt your heart harden and soften at the same time? Harden against the people who refuse you, and soften for the person you've been trying to be. I called Eli last because I knew calling him meant letting someone see me need, and that has always felt like more exposure than I can stand. He answered like he always does, before the second ring's echo died. "Where are you?" he asked, already moving. "I'm coming." And I didn't know it yet, but everything about how love works in my life was about to be rewritten by a man with grease under his nails and a dream he'd been paying for one socket at a time. I walked into their house holding proof like it could change their minds. The estimate with the hospital letterhead, the surgeon's note about timing, the deposit line circled in red. The boat winked at me from the driveway like I'd arrived at the wrong story. Have you ever carried your body into a room as Exhibit A and watched people argue with the paperwork because the truth might cost them something? I laid the folder on the table, my leg throbbing in time with the kitchen clock, and tried to keep my voice clinical. It's limb salvage. They need $25,000 to lock the OR and team by Friday. Insurance reimburses after. I've got savings, I've got a line of credit, but I'm short. I'm asking for help. Dad didn't look at the page. He looked past me toward the window where fiberglass and a financing sticker were already announcing themselves to the neighborhood. "We just bought a boat," he said, like a period. "The down payment, the slip fee, timing is tight." Tight, like my calf, like his jaw, like the way people say no when they want to sound reasonable instead of selfish. Mom folded her hands in front of her like she was leading a prayer. "Honey," she said, gentler than a slap, but with the same sting, "a limp will teach you responsibility. You run too fast. Maybe slowing down is what you need." Responsibility, as if the bill was a moral invoice and my pain was an overdue notice. My sister's face glowed from a tablet propped against a fruit bowl, her kitchen all marble and morning light. "You'll manage," she chirped, mascara perfect. "You always do." Have you ever listened to people praise your resilience while they test its limits for sport? I tried again, small and precise. "It's by Friday. I can sign a loan between us. I'll pay interest. I'll put it in writing." Dad shook his head, already back in a language I didn't speak. "We're not a bank, Jordan. There are programs for this, payment plans." "They don't schedule pending approval," I said, and heard the plea in my voice like a fire alarm I couldn't silence. Mom tilted her head, pity in its prettiest dress. "We can pray. God makes a way." God had made a surgeon. I needed a deposit. The difference between a miracle and a policy is paperwork no one wants to fill out for you. I felt the room tilt. Not dramatic, just the slow lean you get when you finally admit the ground is not on your side. I gathered the folder, each page heavier than when I'd walked in. "Thank you for listening," I said, because manners are muscle memory in families like mine. At the door, I paused. If I don't get on the schedule, I could lose more than time. Mom kissed my cheek like she was wiping something off it. "You'll be fine," she whispered, the way people whisper at funerals when they've run out of useful things to say. In the car, I held the steering wheel like a railing and stared at the boat until the letters on the hull blurred. Have you ever watched a purchase become a decision about the value of your body in real time? I called the bank. "No, we can't raise your limit by Friday." I called billing again. "No, we can't schedule pending charity approval." I opened a crowdfunding page and closed it, shame surging up my throat like heat. I texted the family chat. Understood. A thumbs up bubble popped and fizzled. Understood, like I just confirmed a meeting, not a consequence. I waited to call Eli because calling him meant letting someone in, and letting someone in meant I couldn't lie to myself about how alone I was in that moment. The phone barely rang once. "Where are you?" he asked, breath already a little fast, like he'd run to answer. "Home," I said, and my voice did that break I hate, the one that betrays you when you're trying to sound fine. Don't come. There's nothing to do." "Everything to do," he said. "Text me the estimate. I'm 25 out. "Eli," I said, panic scraping my insides, "do not sell anything. I mean it." He was quiet for a beat, the kind of quiet that is a decision. "Text me the estimate," he said, and hung up because sometimes love refuses to debate. Those next hours were a loop. Ice, elevation, that stupid boat on repeat behind my eyelids. The clock marched toward Friday like it had somewhere better to be. I tried to get comfortable in a chair that had never been kind. My phone buzzed with a message from Eli I didn't understand. "What's routing an account?" I called. "What are you doing?" "Moving things," he said, clipped, guiltless. "Text it." I argued until my leg throbbed harder than my pride. He said, "Jordan, let me fix something for once." And the words cracked something open in me that had been calcified since childhood. Dusk came quick, the way it does on days that take more than they give. Headlights cut across my living room. My stomach dropped and steadied at the same time. Have you ever braced for a person you love because their goodness might hurt as much as your pain? I opened the door before he knocked. Grease-stained hoodie, jaw set, eyes soft and furious. That was my brother. He didn't hug me, he didn't perform a speech. He set a thick envelope on my table with both hands like it weighed what it meant. "Here's $85,000. I stared. "Eli, what did you—" "I sold all my tools," he said, and the room tilted for real. My mouth said no, but the part of me that wanted a future reached. He shook his head, already anticipating the protest. "Money is for fixing things," he said, quiet and certain. "You're my thing to fix." And in that moment between his hands leaving the envelope and my fingers touching it, I realized the main conflict was never the bill. It was the story I'd been told about what I was allowed to ask for and who would show up when I did. I pushed the bank envelope back across the table like it was radioactive. He pushed it back like it was oxygen. "Eli, you can't," I whispered, already calculating the ways this would wreck him. "Those tools are your future." He shook his head, eyes steady in a way mine weren't. "Tools are replaceable. You're not." He said it the way people say their own name. Familiar, unquestioned, true. Have you ever had someone love you in a way that makes all your other definitions of love look like thrift store copies? We were at the bank when the doors opened. First in line, under lights so bright that made my fear look colder than it felt. He asked for a cashier's check, $25,000 to the hospital. Then he moved the rest into a fresh account with my name on it. For rehab, meds, rent, whatever your pride would pretend isn't a bill. He signed where the teller pointed. I wanted to fight him. I wanted to be the woman who could say no to help this big. But I also wanted to walk. Pride can't hop stairs. Humility can. "This isn't a loan," he repeated. "If you try to pay it back, I'm blocking you." He smiled a little then, a crooked thing that only shows up when the decision's already been made. "You can argue after you're out of surgery." Admissions smelled like antiseptic and paper. The registrar slid a stack toward me. Consents, financial responsibility, the line where $25,000 had turned itself into a deposit due now. My hand shook over the pen. Eli's palm covered mine. "Write your name," he said quietly. "Let the rest be my problem." A nurse in scrubs passed, caught the tail end of "sold my tools" as she checked my band, and her eyes did something human. She slipped a Post-it under my forms like a magic trick. "I'm off at noon," she murmured. "Ask for Rosa in case management. Don't leave pre-op without seeing me." A breadcrumb, a promise, or maybe just kindness that wouldn't pan out. Hope is dangerous, but sometimes it's also oxygen. The surgeon found us in a blur of blue caps and purpose. He didn't sugarcoat it. "We caught this in time if everything goes our way." He tapped the schedule with a gloved finger. "Friday, 7 a.m. Team is locked. You'll be NPO after midnight." Locked. The word landed like a floor under my feet. For the first time in days, the countdown in my calf quieted enough for me to hear my own breath. I texted the family chat. "Surgery scheduled, deposit handled." Dad sent a thumbs up. My sister replied, "See, you'll manage." Mom sent 2 praying hands. I stared at the screen until the bubbles stopped pretending they had something else to say. That afternoon, Eli moved into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed like he paid rent there. He didn't talk about what he'd sold unless I asked. When I did, the list was a love letter written in reverse. The big-name wrench sets, the torque sticks, the lift, the project truck he'd been rebuilding on Sundays, gone in a single handshake to a guy who'd been circling for months. He lowballed me, he said. No bitterness, just fact. Didn't matter. He said he'd figure out the shop later. "What good is someday if you're not there?" he asked, and my throat burned with a kind of gratitude that makes you want to apologize to the universe for every time you settled for less. Pre-op was its own small city. Rosa from case management materialized like the Post-it had conjured her. She listened as I told her the short version, the deposit, the timeline, the brother who had just disassembled his future so I could have one. She tapped and scrolled, eyes moving like she'd been waiting her whole career to find a loophole that wasn't cruel. "I can't promise anything," she said, honest and kind, "but there are programs you qualified for on paper that someone missed in practice. Work status matters. State protections matter. Give me permission to pull your file." I signed the release like it might turn into a rope. "Don't tell your brother yet," she added with a tiny smile I didn't know how to read. My heart ticked harder. Good news is a cliff until it has a bridge. Night before surgery hours have their own sound. Machines sigh and beep, hall lights dim, and the fear gets loud. Eli stretched out in the chair, hoodie balled under his neck, shoes still on in case I needed something at 3 a.m. He didn't make speeches. He told me dumb stories about customers who think their cars healed themselves if they park them with the hood up. He handed me water and held it like a thing that could spill the wrong way. "You don't have to stay," I said, because part of me still believed I only deserved the portion of love that didn't inconvenience anyone. He made a face. "I sold my entire life to be here," he said, a half laugh in it. "Sitting is the easy part." Sometime after midnight, I wrote him a note I didn't plan to say out loud yet. "I'll pay you back. Every cent. With interest. With something bigger than money." He snored softly through the scratch of my pen, and I let myself believe for 1 minute that there would be a later to deliver on that promise. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "This is Rosa. Don't worry. Sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk." Another breadcrumb. Another cliff. At 6:45, they rolled me down a hallway that suddenly looked kinder than the one I'd walked a week before. My gown gaped. My fear didn't. Eli walked beside the bed, one hand on the rail like he could steady the whole rolling world. "He'll be here when you wake up," he said, and it didn't sound like a vow, it sounded like gravity. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, her eyes smiling above her mask. "Think of somewhere you want to walk," she said, and I saw a future, even if I didn't believe it yet.
The last thing I registered was the grease still ghosting Eli's knuckles, the proof of everything he'd given up so my body could learn a different ending. They wheeled me through the OR doors and the light changed. Somewhere outside that room, a case manager was building something quietly. Somewhere down the hall, a story was already moving without my permission. Eli squeezed my fingers once and let go. He didn't know what was coming. Neither did I.
I woke up to beeping and the scrape of a chair leg, and a weight on my hand that felt like a promise. The first thought was a scream I didn't say out loud. Do I still have it? I tried to wiggle my toes. One moved, then another. Have you ever felt a prayer answer you from inside your own body? Eli leaned into my field of view, eyes red, grin uneven like it had been fighting his fear for hours. They saved it, he said, voice husky. Doc said blood flow looks good. You did it. No, my throat worked around the toothache. We did. The surgeon appeared in that practiced cloud of relief and caveat. He said, we achieved perfusion and structural repair. Now it's time to protect the win. No heroics, strict rehab, we watch for complications. It could have been a foreign language, and I would have still understood the only sentence that mattered. We saved your leg. Have you ever heard 7 words reorder your life? Then Rosa arrived with a folder and a smile that didn't make promises it couldn't keep. She asked, you up for some good news? Her eyes flicked to Eli like she knew who deserved to hear it first. I nodded, already crying in that quiet way you do when the pain and the relief don't know where to stand. Okay, she said, pulling up a chair. 3 things. First, the deposit. I ran your eligibility through the State Limb Preservation Program and the hospital's Compassionate Care Fund. You qualified on 3 criteria that should have been flagged at intake but weren't. Effective immediately, your deposit is being refunded to the original payer, and the remaining hospital and surgical charges are covered under that combined approval. The room tilted, but not the scary way, more like an elevator's first gentle drop. Refunded? I repeated, stupid with shock. To the original payer? She nodded. Back to the account the cashier's check was drawn from. It takes a few business days, but it's already in motion. I turned to Eli. He blinked like someone had switched a light on behind his eyes. He hadn't asked for anything back. He handed me his future and walked away. Have you ever watched generosity boomerang with interest? Second, Rosa continued, we've got home health and PT approved. No gaps. You focus on healing, not spreadsheets. She glanced at my chart, then at me. You'll need both grit and rest. Grit, I know you have. I'm here to guard the rest. My breath snagged on a laugh that hurt and healed at the same time. Eli squeezed my fingers, careful around the IV. What's the third? He asked, and for the first time since he put that envelope on my table, I saw the hope he'd been holding with both hands. Rosa took a breath like she was about to set down a gift she hadn't wanted to jinx. I shared a de-identified note with our foundation about a family member who liquidated his livelihood to fund a surgical deposit. No names, no details, just the shape of the sacrifice. A donor saw it and called a friend at a national tool company. The company called me this morning. She slid a business card on my blanket like a key. They want to replace your tools. All of them. New. Delivered. And a local small business fund is offering a micro grant to help you reestablish your bay when you're ready, if you say yes. Eli didn't move. He looked at the card, then at me, then back at Rosa, like the world had shifted a degree to the right and he was checking if he had imagined it. Why? He managed. Because you did the thing that matters, Rosa said simply. You showed up. People notice when love looks like that. He sank back into the chair like his bones had just remembered gravity. He wasn't a man built for tears. He was a man built for torque and stubborn bolts. But his face folded, soft and shocked, and he pressed his palms to his eyes like a kid. Have you ever watched someone who expects nothing receive more than they would have dared to ask for? My phone buzzed on the tray with the worst possible timing. Family chat lighting up. How to go from Dad. Praying hands ×3 from Mom. Told you you'd manage, for my sister.
I stared at the screen, at the boat catalog of a life that had refused to spot me on a climb. Then I set the phone face down and looked at my brother who had sold his tomorrow so I could have mine. I took his hand. "We're getting your life back, and then some." Rosa stood. "Rest," she said, gathering her folder. "I'll be back with paperwork and timelines. The refund is automatic. The tools will require a conversation. The grant wants a simple plan, nothing fancy." She paused at the curtain. "Also, the nurse who left me that Post-it note says hi. She says we take care of our own." The curtain swished, and we were alone again with the good kind of silence. I dozed and woke and dozed again in that pain med haze that makes clocks meaningless. When the fog thinned, Eli was still there, phone dead, head tipped back, mouth open, an exhausted guardian angel. I watched his chest rise and fall and planned in the space his snore left for me. Have you ever started sketching a future from a hospital bed? I pictured Elise with his name on it, a lift humming, his sign over a bay he didn't have to rent by the month. The refund would clear, the tools would come, the grant would seed, and then I would do the thing he'd never ask for. Make sure what he gave me didn't just return, it multiplied. He didn't know what was coming, not yet, but I did. And for the first time in a long time, the next part of my life didn't sound like a plea, it sounded like a plan.
The refund hit on a Wednesday morning. Eli texted 3 words that looked like a heartbeat on my screen. It came back. He sent a screenshot before I could type. The $25,000 deposit had landed in the same account he drained to buy me time, a neat line of numbers that didn't show the nights he'd spent wide awake doing math with his future. Have you ever watched something you thought was gone come home? Like a stray that still knew your porch light? I stared at the image until my eyes stung, and then I called him. He said nothing for a second, just breathed, like the world had unclenched. "Good," he finally managed. "Now we get you walking." Walking became a job. PT at 8 a.m., ice at noon, elevation that turned into meditation because you learn to sit with a body that is healing without hurrying. Rosa kept showing up like a quiet army. Home health scheduled, copay zeroed out, paperwork that would have eaten my afternoons handled before I knew it existed. Eli learned the route to my apartment blindfolded. He cooked badly, and I ate gratefully. When the first delivery truck pulled up outside his place, a white box with a logo he'd dog-eared in catalogs for years, he called me like a kid. "They're here," he whispered, as if speaking too loud might scare the donation away. 2 men wheeled in chests that clicked open like treasure, wrench sets that gleamed, torque wrenches that still smelled like factory, diagnostic tools in foam beds with his name on the packing slip. He sent me a photo of his empty bay filling back up 1 case at a time. And for the first time in weeks, I laughed without wincing. Have you ever seen the universe repay a debt you never knew how to collect? I didn't touch the rest of the money he'd moved into that account with my name on it, the Rehab Meds Rent Fund. The hospital had covered what it should have covered from the start, and Rosa was guarding the rest like a bouncer. I let the balance sit while I did something he would never have let me do if I'd asked. I started making calls. I toured a row of squat cinder block bays off an industrial street that smelled like rubber and small beginnings. I met a landlord who cared more about steady tenants than shiny brochures. I filed paperwork nobody likes. License, insurance, a bank account in his business name. I worked a spreadsheet like a prayer. The foundation's micro grant cleared. The tool donation expanded after one of their reps came to see the guy who sold his world. They added a lift, then a second. A friend who owes me nothing built a website that didn't look like a favor. And the remainder in that account? I turned it into prepaid months on a lease and a stack of receipts he couldn't tell me to return because time was already paid for. I told Eli to meet me on a Saturday to pick up a part. He showed up in the same hoodie he'd slept in at the hospital, the sleeves finally clean. I made him ride with his eyes closed the last half block because hope is better when it arrives all at once. Left. 2 more steps. Okay. Open. The sign swung slightly in the breeze over a glass door he didn't yet know was his. Ellis & Sons Auto.
Yes, I put my name on it, even though we don't have sons, because legacy is a seed you plant before you know whose hands will water it. He didn't speak. He just stared, mouth open, until I thought he might forget to breathe. Inside, the concrete floor shone. The lifts were bolted, red and certain. Tool chests waited in a row like soldiers. A small office smelled like new carpet and coffee. On the desk sat a folder fat with boring things that make a life. Lease paid for a year, utilities turned on, insurance binder, city permit, a calendar with his first 2 months of small jobs booked from people who had watched the delivery trucks on his street and asked if he'd be ready soon. I put a key in his hand that matched the lock, and his silence broke like light through a garage door dawn. "Jordan," he said, but it came out like a prayer that didn't know where to aim. "You gave me a future," I said, my throat tight and proud. "I'm just returning the favor with interest." I slid another envelope across the desk, older, heavier, this one with a cashier's check inside for the balance he had pushed into my account and I hadn't had to spend. "This is yours. Before you tell me no," I added, seeing his eyes start to protest, "it's not a loan. It's restitution. The hospital did what it should have covered. The deposit came home. The rest turned into this place. If you don't cash it, I'll convert it into prepaid parts and you'll be haunted by inventory until you give in." He laughed then, really laughed, the sound of a man whose world has been dismantled and rebuilt with care. He pressed the envelope to his chest like the last page of a book he loved. "You didn't have to," he said, which is what people say when they can't bear how much you wanted to. "I wanted to," I said. "That's what family is supposed to feel like." Our parents found out the way people who love optics always do. A cousin tagged a photo of Eli under the new sign, grease on his hands and a grin so wide it hurt to look at. Dad texted first, "Proud of you, son," boat emoji. I stared at it for a long time before I chose my reply. "We're having a soft opening Saturday," I wrote. "You're welcome to come as family, not as sponsors, not for photos, just as people who want to clap." Mom called, voice syrupy with the kind of praise that shows up when the hard part is over. "We knew you'd figure it out," she said, and the words landed the way they always had, like a compliment that erases the cost. "I figured nothing out," I said quietly. "Eli did. People did. Policies were corrected. If you come Saturday, you're there to support, not to rewrite." They came. My sister did too. Sunglasses big and sorry, late in the way apologies are when they realize nobody needs them to open the door. They hugged Eli and he hugged them back because he has always been better at being soft than I am. I watched from the corner and chose not to narrate the history for anyone who hadn't earned it. Have you ever learned that boundaries can be a celebration instead of a wall? I handed Dad a raffle ticket and asked him to hold the trash bag while kids wolfed down donuts. It felt right. By the time the open sign flipped, we had a waiting list. Eli took the first job like a benediction, an old sedan with a knock that had been ignored too long. He listened, diagnosed, torqued, and when he slid from under the car, his smile had grease in it and something like peace. He looked up at the lifts, at the tools lined up in foam, at me leaning on a crutch I didn't need for long distances anymore, and said, "I thought I lost everything to get you that surgery." He shook his head like he couldn't believe the math. Turns out I was making a down payment. The boat still sits in our parents' driveway most days, shrink-wrapped and waiting for a version of life that keeps not arriving. I don't look at it with bitterness anymore. It's just a choice they made. I made mine. Eli made his, and now there's a space in the city where someone's emergency will be met with work instead of lectures, with labor instead of lessons. Sometimes I sit on the step of the bay and listen to the sound of air tools and a radio turned low and think, this is what love looks like when it grows up. On the first night we locked up, Eli handed me the broom. "It's tradition," he said, smiling. "Owner sweeps last." I took it because I like the sound of that word in his mouth. Owner. He flipped the lights and the dark didn't scare me. It felt like rest. We pulled the door down together, the metal rattling like a reminder that building something makes noise. He didn't know what was coming the night he dropped that envelope on my table. Neither did I. But it arrived anyway. refunds and grants, and a shop with our name over the door, and it brought something bigger than receipts. It brought back a story about family I'd stopped believing, the one where love is a verb, and generosity comes home with friends.
I used to think strength meant never needing anybody. Like grit could be a savings account you draw from when life sends a bill with your name on it. But the hardest part of healing wasn't the stitches or the scar. It was rewriting the story I'd been handed about what I deserved. Have you ever realized the voice in your head that calls you strong is sometimes just an echo of people who don't want to help? We just bought a boat. A limp will teach you responsibility. You'll manage. Those sentences tried to shrink my world down to a lesson I didn't ask to learn. But a limp didn't teach me responsibility. Love did. Love in a grease-stained hoodie that sold a future and sat in a plastic chair all night. Love that turned money back into what it always should have been, a tool, not a test. People ask me what I'd tell someone standing where I stood, with a deadline on their body and a chorus of no's rehearsed like a hymn. I'd say this: ask anyway. Ask out loud. Ask on paper. The shame you feel isn't proof you're wrong. It's proof you were trained to carry other people's comfort. Find the one who shows up with a duffel full of everything they can give and a sentence that sounds like a steady hand. Write your name. Let the rest be my problem. And when help comes back with interest, refunds, grants, strangers who recognize a sacrifice without needing the backstory, don't call it luck. Call it what it is. Community, doing what family refused to do. Then turn that blessing into structure so it doesn't stop with you. Paperwork is love that learned to stand. I won't lie and say the hurt disappears when the outcome is good. I still walk past my parents' driveway and see a shrink-wrapped boat waiting for a version of life they keep postponing, and a younger part of me wants to keep auditioning for their kindness. But healing sounds different now. It sounds like a lift humming and a broom scraping a clean floor at closing. It sounds like Eli's laugh when he forgets he almost lost everything to give me a chance. It sounds like my own steps even, and the quiet miracle of not counting them anymore. Boundaries turned out not to be walls, but doorways. I told them, you can come as family, not as sponsors. And when they clapped, I let the sound land without rewriting the past. If you're listening to this from a chair that hurts and a clock that won't slow down, hear me. Your need isn't a failing. It's an invitation for the right people to reveal themselves. Do not measure your worth against someone else's purchase. Do not mistake "you'll manage" for a blessing. It's often just a dismissal wearing manners. And don't confuse the myth of the strong Black woman with a mandate to bleed quietly. You're allowed to say, "I need help," and still be the strongest person in the room. The day we locked up after the soft opening, Eli handed me the broom and said, "Owner sweeps last." I laughed and pushed the dust toward the door, one long stripe of everything we'd built settling into place. Outside, the sign caught the late light. My leg didn't buckle. I put my full weight on it, and it held. That's what love did. It held. It turned an envelope into a shop, a deposit into a down payment, a sister into a partner, and a man who thought he'd given everything into someone who finally had enough. He didn't know what was coming when he said, "Money is for fixing things." Neither did I. But it came anyway, with receipts and keys and a future you can touch. And now when someone says, "You'll manage," I smile and answer, "We will." Because the only responsibility worth learning is the kind that we carry for each other, and that kind brings you home with interest.